What do you think about the Laker team now?
You follow the box scores of the games every day? Just the Lakers.
You're kidding. That is really a compliment. I was pleased to see you smile at the top of our show because once the game starts, you have a game face. You don't smile much out there.
I don't think you have to do things for money anymore.
Correct.
What's up, Laker fans? Welcome to the Laker Film Room podcast. I'm Pete Darius, joined as always by Darius Soriano of Form Blue and Gold. Today we have a very special guest. Very excited to have her on. She's taken a slow road trip across the southern United States, covering the Orlando Magic for the Orlando Sentinel, then the Houston Texans for the Houston Chronicle and ESPN, and then making her way back to her hometown to cover the Lakers for the LA Times. Really an honor to have her on. She's one of my favorite reads in the game. Tania Ganguli. Tania, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So let's get right into it. This week had some interesting news, unexpected news with Kyrie Irving demanding a trade, either behind the scenes, and perhaps it didn't stay quite so behind the scenes. And there's been rumblings of a possible LeBron James to the Lakers connection, of which this event seems to, if you're a Laker fan, make that a little bit more feasible. From the people that you've spoken with, is this another, Laker fan fantasy, or is there some traction to the idea of LeBron coming in free agency next year?
I thought it was another Laker fan fantasy when I first heard it. I was like, everybody gets connected to the Lakers at some point. But I covered the finals, and so I was around a lot of people that would know better than I would. And it started to feel like something that is actually a real possibility. Now, is he going to come? I think there's a lot of stuff that has to fall into place because the team as it is right now, he likes LA a lot, but he also really likes this final streak that he has going. And his legacy is really important to him, and winning is important to him. And he's only going to go somewhere where he feels like he can compete with the Warriors and that he has a chance to keep his final streak intact. So I wouldn't say that I would call it a given right now, but it's definitely a real possibility, and it's something that he's really going to be considering.
Wow, that's stunning. That's really exciting to hear that. What are some of the things that you think have to happen? I would imagine that both Lonzo and Ingram. Kind of my thought is, LeBron is getting up there in age, and as good as we think Lonzo and Ingram are going to be, they're still kids, and so does LeBron. What does LeBron need to see? Is it a tremendous amount of growth from those guys, or perhaps will they be parlayed for guys who are more ready to compete on a championship roster? What does he need to happen from the Lakers' perspective in order for it to be a stronger possibility?
Well, I think Lonzo, even just right now, he's obviously going to struggle with some things this year. And he still has physically he's got a little ways to go. But I think the way he played in Summer League, even though it was just Summer League, it was really exciting I know we're going to get into this later, but it was really exciting for a lot of the people in the organization. And it was exciting for, LeBron was there and watched him in person. And it's amazing the feel he has for the game is just amazing. And that was a good recruiting tool for the Lakers, to have LeBron in person watching Lonzo play, and to just be him being able to envision what it would be like what it's going to be like once Lonzo is surrounded by a full NBA roster. So that's one thing. But I do think that there needs to be a second star that's ready to compete at that level. That's on the Lakers roster along with LeBron. And the Lakers have talked about this a lot. They want to add 2 max guys next summer. Whether LeBron is one of them, I guess remains to be seen, but they know that in order to be competitive for a championship, they have to add those 2 max guys. Lonzo has to be what he's been so far and what they're all expecting him to be. And sort of some of those things have to fall in place. So I do think that, I don't want to overstate this and say, LeBron is coming to the Lakers, but because there's so many dominoes that have to fall, and there's a lot that could go wrong.
One of the things I think that can go wrong is that the Lakers don't actually have projected, at least, the salary cap space to actually sign to top tier or max con contract players. With Luol Deng's contract on the books and Jordan Clarkson's contract on the books, and to a certain extent, even the cap hold that's going to exist for Julius Randle in restricted free agency, the Lakers have more maneuvering to do. They started already to clear the books some by trading D'Angelo Russell in order to get off of Timofey Mozgov's contract, but it seems like there's more work to do there. And I wanted to ask you, do you have a sense of how confident the front office is in being able to make some of these moves? I know Magic Johnson had said recently after a press conference that he wouldn't have started to make the moves that he has already if he wasn't confident that he could spend the money, but there's still some space that they need to sort of carve out here.
Yeah, there is space that they right now, as it stands right now, they don't have the room to add 2 max guys. But they are talking like they do, and that tells me that they're very, very confident that they can. There's some movable pieces. They feel like they can trade Jordan Clarkson if they need to. There's some flexibility they have with what their decision is on Julius Randle next summer. So there are some things that they can do to free up some cap space. Obviously, being able to trade Mozgov was really helpful because that took up a big chunk of what the cap space that they'll need for that. But when they made that move, they sort of looked at it like, now the path is pretty easy if we need to get, that was the Lakers thinking. The path is pretty easy if you need to make the space to sign 2 max guys.
Between what you just said regarding the salary cap realities, and whenever Magic has spoken about the young core, he's very effusive in his praise. But the one guy who's conspicuous by his absence is Jordan Clarkson. And so between those realities, are Jordan's days in LA likely numbered?
Well, actually, early on, he talked a lot about Jordan Clarkson. If you remember, when Magic first came on board and sort of first took over, he would mention that he felt like Jordan could be a really good defender with some time. Like they just need to teach him the right way, and that he has the body to be a really great defender. So, but I think that he has a contract that is easy to trade, and you can upgrade at that position. So what became clear is, as time went on, when they kept saying young core, but what became clear is that really the one guy, the priority for building around and for keeping in the group is Brandon Ingram. They've mentioned a few times, like, that's the guy we won't trade. And that's really, the coaching staff just loves him so much, believes in his potential, believes that he can become an all-star pretty quickly here. So that's the one guy. But beyond that, I think pretty much everyone else was on some level available.
Should I presume that Lonzo has joined Ingram in that respect, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I thought so. Sorry, my some red flags popped up for me when you said that. Yeah. And so the Lakers just came off of a very successful summer league in which they won the championship, and more importantly, Ingram looked great in the one game that he played, and Lonzo really showed how he could put his stamp on the team. Obviously they're excited in terms of what they have, but I'm trying to get a feel for the degree. What do they feel like they really do have the face of the franchise in Lonzo and Ingram as the untouchable next to him, or is this kind of more things that you say at a press conference?
No, I think that it's their insistence on keeping Brandon is very real. It's not just at a press conference that they're saying that. It's really because the coaching staff believes in him so much, which they see him every day. They understand him in a way that people who just watch him on film don't. Because you hear around the league a lot of people in other places aren't so sure, they're not sold yet, but in the building they definitely are.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Pete and I go back and forth on Ingram a lot. We've broken him down in terms of his game multiple times and gotten into little arguments with little bets about how successful Ingram might be in his NBA career.
I have had that same conversation with so many people. Yeah, that's I think there's a big split about him. You know, some people just really believe it. So, you know, and I don't know. I guess I'm trusting what the Lakers coaching staff sees because you know, I assume they know more about basketball than I do. So I'm just and they're with him every day, but there are definitely lots of people who don't feel that way.
Who are the types of people? Obviously, you know, no names or anything, but are they scouts? Are they other beat reporters? Kind of what's the general vibe of where that skepticism is coming from?
I've heard from scouts and other both groups. So like basketball people that like work in the league and also people who cover the league who just, you know, aren't sold yet. But
What are some of the things that they communicate specifically regarding the skepticism?
I think there's questions about his competitiveness maybe. But I think that I mean, from what I see on that, in terms of that, I don't see, I don't see. I mean, I think that he has a little bit more of a reserved personality, um, and I think you saw that changing a little bit this summer in the one summer league game he played. And I know it's just summer league. You saw that. I also think that there's some question. People wonder how his body will develop. They don't know if he'll, you know, like ideally he develops into the same body type as Kevin Durant. Um, but some people don't know. So I've had some people compare him to like Tayshaun Prince. Um, so
Yeah, I think that all that stuff is really fair about Ingram. And I mean, he's still really young, and so projecting any of these guys out to be a future All-Star or like a top, you know, 10 or 15 or even 20 player in the league, that's hard. And I think fans specifically have expectations about players selected as high as Brandon Ingram was, but the reality of the draft is that some guys just don't pan out to equal what their draft status was, and that's just the nature of basketball. I think that you've been around the league long enough to see it up close in multiple places, including the Magic, right, where they they consistently drafted guys who were high, and then, you know, and then suddenly a Dwight Howard comes along and he actually reaches his potential, but that's actually more rare than what
mhm.
it is common, even at the top of the draft.
Yeah, for sure. It's not a given, as we see over and over and over again, that somebody will become great just because they're drafted up there. Um, but you know, what the people, you know, someone like Ingram, like what the people who are working with him every day see is somebody who has really strong potential.
I'm curious in the context of LeBron and even another Max player. I think, you know, for me at least, the best case scenario is LeBron and Paul George, right? Two heavily rumored guys for the Lakers. But you know, if LeBron wants to compete with the Warriors, it's great to have a Paul George next to him. But the Warriors have four stars, varying from, you know, solid all star to the best players in the game. And for me, you know, a guy like Ingram, this is a huge year for him because regardless of what the people in the Lakers building think of him, he's going to have to produce. If LeBron comes, he's going to have to produce to a level where he has to be the third or fourth best guy on the team. So, but I really hope that, you know, the front office and the people in the building, they're the ones that know him best. And I'm with you. They know more about basketball than all of us do. So hopefully that faith is properly placed. I wanted to get into, Tania, you had an amazing, it was a profile on both Genie Bus and even further the dynamic within the Bus family, in which we really learned a lot about the changeover from the when she let Jim and Mitch go, and kind of her asserting more of a presence within the Lakers organization than she had prior. I'm curious, as a beat reporter, as somebody who's in the Toyota Center all the time, in El Segundo, their practice facility, and at the games all the time, who's there all of the time. Did you notice a difference in the changeover, just the vibe in the building from when Jim and Mitch were there, then afterward when it was Magic and Palenka?
Yeah, I definitely did. And it happened. It started to happen while we were all on the road. I think we were in New York or DC, and I remember being in the locker room, and suddenly it was DC. Now I can like picture myself in the cab. So suddenly, the Lakers announced Magic Johnson has been named an advisor to Jeannie Buss, and like nobody had any idea. Like they just like, and there just was this like lack of communication um in the organization as a whole. And there were a lot of people who were like not that surprised that they had no idea, this, because that's sort of how things had been going. Like things would happen and like nobody would tell anyone. And the what I started to see was that it was a little more open. And there was a little more it was a little more open, but there were also, there are now like more layers to the Lakers. The Lakers, their power structure. There are more people involved now, and they're meeting all the time. They're sitting down with each other. There's like a core group of decision makers in the franchise that we're all getting together, on a regular basis to talk about different parts of the organization. So it was definitely a big change, and like it sort of felt more like one foot knew what the other foot was doing. I think that there was the communication. What I learned in reporting that story about Jeannie is that the communication in the organization had really fallen off all season, really, and it's probably not a coincidence that started to happen just as Jim Buss's timeline, his self-imposed timeline, was coming to its end.
So, what is Jeannie's goal in terms of how she goes about changing? You mentioned the communication what is. I mean, obviously the championship is the goal, but there are infrastructure, organizational goals within that lead to creating that. So what did she want to do aside from getting the Lakers back to glory, specifically organizational changes to get the Lakers back on that road at the very least?
Well, I mean, that the main thing for her was having people that she could trust. And that was a big part of why Magic Johnson is in the role he's in, because I did like a little sidebar about that too when I wrote that story, because they've known each other for so many years. And they're always on the phone with each other. And she wanted to be able to like trust someone to deal with all the basketball stuff and to fix it, so that she didn't have to worry about it. She wanted to be in the loop, but she didn't want to have to worry about it. And I think that was a big part of her goal. The thing that hurt her the most when you talk about the Lakers and what had been happening with them for the last few years, the thing that she really struggled with was that people didn't want to play for the Lakers anymore. And that, to her, like she told me, I just didn't recognize that, because it was never like that. I mean, well, I won't say it was never like that, but like that's something that she really took personally, and she felt like her dad's legacy was he wanted the Lakers to be competitive. He wanted the Lakers to be thought of like the Boston Celtics, and for people to, for Kevin Durant to not even take a meeting with the Lakers. That kind of stuff was really what she wanted to change. She wanted people to speak positively about her dad's team again.
Yeah, no, the narrative surrounding the Lakers had changed so significantly over the course of years that, and she was there every step of the way throughout that, from, when Magic was drafted and basically growing up with him, as you really illuminated in that piece. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. From one thing that struck me was, after reading your piece, I thought to myself, she wouldn't have hired anybody but Magic for this job. How close they were, and how I guess I didn't realize how her father saw Magic, and I know how much Jeannie valued her father's opinion on that. So was Magic, if it wasn't going to be Jim, I've kind of lamented that the Lakers don't go outside of the family to look for the most talented people necessarily for, general manager positions, president of B-ball ops. But reading your piece made me realize, kind of, was there an inevitability? If it wasn't going to be Jim, was it going to be Magic all along?
That's the one I had that question really late in my process of writing the story, and I sort of never came back to it. I don't. I think you might be right. Like, I don't know if she would have trusted anybody else, if she would have empowered anybody else as much as she empowered him. And you know, she needed help to make the to. I mean, I sort of wonder like how a search would have gone. Like if they actually went through a search to find a new president of basketball operations, like how would that have gone? Who would she have trusted to help her make that search, do that search, and find the right guy? I think that this works for her because this is somebody that she just implicitly trusts and never feels like she has to worry about, what's going on behind the scenes.
I wanted to ask, so speaking of sort of this trust question, it seemed like one of the things that really eroded the trust at the end was the reporting that came out that Jim and Mitch were having conversations around a potential trade for DeMarcus Cousins and were having conversations about young players who were part of the core as potential pieces who would go to the Kings. And Jeannie was not looped in on that, reportedly. And I wanted to kind of get from you if those were things that you have heard as well, and if that was sort of just the cherry on the sundae, was that, or was that sort of, or were they sort of already past a point of no return, Jeannie with Jim and Mitch in power?
That stuff was all in keeping with how things had been all season long. They weren't talking to her. Like from the start of the season, they weren't talking to her because they knew what situation they were in. And she actually thought that bringing Magic in would be helpful for that. She thought, Magic and Mitch were teammates. Maybe they'll talk to each other. And maybe like then that will help, and they can, Magic can be her like liaison to their front office. And that didn't happen. So I do think that was a big part of it, that was, once that didn't work, it just wasn't going to work. The whole thing wasn't going to work.
One of the more interesting parts of the article for me was, for one, that you got Johnny Buss on record and you had him speaking so candidly. You explained how he and Jim tried, they filed in court to get her removed as I'm sorry, I believe they tried to have a meeting. Correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, Tania. Tried to have a meeting to get her ousted from the governor of the board of directors. Is that correct?
They tried to sort of reshuffle the board of directors so that she wasn't on it. Right.
And so she filed in court what's the term I'm looking for? She filed to get that stopped, that motion blocked.
And an injunction? Is that right?
He filed a restraining order on the meeting.
Yes.
My girlfriend's a lawyer. She's gonna kill. Anyway, so one of the things that was really interesting about Johnny's angle is he seemed to be playing both sides against the middle a bit, in that he did this and then, he kind of came back when it didn't work out with his tail between his legs and wasn't really trying to oust you. And he also had this amazing quote about like, I don't really want to be a part of this in the first place. And if I could sell my shares, I would. So what was your experience like with Johnny? I thought that whole angle was fascinating.
Yeah, I just emailed him and he said, I said, I'm doing a feature about your sister. I'd love to talk to you. And he said if I would love to be part of a story that's positive about my family. And so that's sort of how that started. He was really, I didn't know how much he would be willing to talk about that stuff. So I sort of saved it for the end. I asked a bunch of other things, talked to him about Magic, his childhood, a lot of that stuff first. And then I sort of started to delve into that. And I think we maybe talked for like an hour after that. Because it was, I think it seems like he wants it out there that if he could sell his shares, he would, but he can't. Essentially he can't because, because of the way the trust is structured, it's not, he doesn't own, these individuals don't own the Lakers. The trust owns the Lakers, or owns 66% of the Lakers. So, so yeah, he just wanted, he sort of, what he was saying, and, what he was saying was that he never wanted to unseat Jeannie. So he sort of was saying that they had other goals. They wanted to keep track of the financial stuff, the Lakers' financials a little bit better, and that's what he was seeking to do by, by changing by calling that meeting. And he insists that he had no idea that they were going to recommend removing her in the meeting. That's what he says. So, you take that for what it's worth, but it just, he hadn't, when you write a story like that, you want to get both sides, because I felt like, and I'm sure everyone else who's written that did, I just got lucky and he was willing to talk, but, you want to get both sides of it, because it is a pretty sensitive thing. And people, I think people have the right to defend themselves if they'd like to. So that's sort of how that came together.
So I think that we could do like a 10-hour podcast about the Buss family in general, and just all of the dynamics and interplay between the siblings. It seems now, though, that moving forward, there seems to be a much clearer structure in place with Jeannie at the top, and then Joey and Jesse playing prominent roles within the organization on the scouting and G League side. Did they name that after you, Tanya, the G League? But and so I'm interested in just sort of your overall perspective about. You mentioned earlier that the vibe was sort of different around the organization. Does it really feel too, though, that there's this burden sort of lifted off of all of the players, not the players who are on the court, but the players within ownership and at the front office level, that things are just now sort of back on track, that there's no more infighting to worry about, that there's no more, court dates and things like that?
Yeah, I do feel like generally they feel that everybody's on the same side now. Whereas there was a little bit of tension. Jeannie Buss and her two older brothers, Jim and Johnny, they've had a little bit of a strained relationship for a long time. So this, like, their situation is not that new. And there were, when I was researching to do this story, I was reading back at older stories, and there were people quoted years ago, 20 years ago, saying this is not going to work. To have all the kids involved in the Lakers is not going to work. And it was partly because of that strained relationship. So I do feel like now, and Johnny admits that, he told me this really cool story about sitting in the limo outside of Jack Kent Cook's office when his dad was making the deal. And his dad came to him and said, like, just wait here, this is going to be really special. And he went in and bought, the Lakers and the Forum and the Kings and the Ranch. And it just never interested Johnny, other than it was his dad's project. And he loved his dad and he wanted to be around his dad all the time, but he wasn't really interested in running a basketball team. He wasn't really interested in sports. He wasn't, that just wasn't his thing. So I think that that's definitely part of it. But to answer your question, and I'm sort of rambling here, but to answer your question, I do think that they feel like everybody's on the same side now, and that's going to take some pressure off of their day-to-day operations.
Is Jim involved in any way at this point? Obviously, Johnny doesn't want to be, and I don't think Jim and Jeannie specifically. We know that Joey and Jesse and obviously Jeannie are deeply involved in the team, but are Jim and Jeannie still involved in the Lakers in any meaningful way at this point?
I believe Jim and Johnny were both removed from the board of directors and removed as trustees, and they were replaced by Joey and Jeannie. So she is involved. She's not involved on a day-to-day basis, but she does have power in the organization and with the trust. Jim and Johnny are sort of, Johnny described it as that he resigned from everything to do with the Lakers. And he resigned from everything to do with the Lakers, and he had that really dramatic quote where he said, "I've also resigned from the Buss family." So they've sort of been a separation there.
Yeah, those are strong words. So is it fair to say that the people, the Busses who are involved in running the team in a meaningful way, are all kind of, for the first time since Jerry's death, all on the same team? Janie, Jeannie, Joey, and Jesse, they're all kind of rowing in the same direction?
Yes, absolutely.
That's really comforting, and I think that's probably I'm sure that isn't lost on agents and players around the league. What is the reaction from the other beat reporters, the people with that work for other teams? What has the reaction around the league been to this kind of changing of the guard?
I think that I think cautious optimism probably is the right way to put it, because there's no evidence about, this is all building toward next year. So next summer is really when we can judge how they've done. So far, everybody's really impressed. And I think a lot of people were really impressed that they went out and said, we are not going to do big deals this summer. We're going to save our cap space. We're going to be smart about this. And then they actually did that. And when there were agents calling to say, hey, my guy will come, but it has to be a 3-year deal, whatever it is, they were saying no. And that's, the last front office, the thing that really startled a lot of NBA people about the Mozgov and Deng deals wasn't just their number, but it was the length of the deals. So the fact that this front office is being very prudent about that, I think was really impressive for people. But, there's no track record to go off of. Nobody knows exactly what Magic Johnson is like as an executive. So I think, there's still some time. There's still some time before you can really judge how they've been doing, but so far they've been doing the right things.
Yeah, I think just from an objective standpoint that they've been disciplined in how they've gone about doing their business, dating all the way back to the Lou Williams trade. I think people can haggle about the D'Angelo Russell deal because a lot of people were maybe high on him as a prospect. Go ahead.
Yeah. But if you look at, so the way that I judge the D'Angelo Russell deal is what did they want and what were they able to get? So they had been interested in trading D'Angelo Russell for a very long time. And to be able to not only do that, the reason I thought, when that trade went down, my reaction was this is amazing. This was it was so great for them that they were able to do it because they had been trying to trade him for so long. They got rid of that Mozgov salary and part of that. And they were able to move on from a guy that really just wasn't fitting here. I mean, D'Angelo could have a great career with a change of scenery. But here the Lakers felt that it was time to move on from him. So to me that was, you can disagree that you can disagree on what D'Angelo will become and whether they got rid of a guy that could have been important to their future. But inside the building, they felt it was time to move on, and they were able to do it in a really smart way that helps them for their future.
Can you delve? And I understand that you can't, get too much into detail, but it's interesting to hear that from, it wasn't just the benefit of getting rid of Mozgov, but they were trying to deal Russell independently of getting rid of Mozgov, and then being able to attach that was kind of the cherry on the sundae. Without, again, getting into any details that you don't want to get into, can you get into some of the reasons why they were looking to do that with D'Angelo and why they felt it was time to move on?
Well, they knew they were going to get a really talented point guard in this draft. So that's, I think, the first thing, that they knew they would be able to move on at that position. I don't think they had a long conversation. I don't know if you guys remember early on, maybe the day or two after Pelinka was made official, he was in the gym and he was just having like individual, not, I wouldn't necessarily call them meetings, but they were just individual chats about with each player. Magic and he would go talk to them one at a time, and they spent a long time talking to D'Angelo. And I think they wanted to know, they wanted to understand his mentality and sort of how he, who he was as a guy. And it seemed to me a lot of the time last year, one of the things that they were trying to work with him on and trying to get him to change was how he responded to adversity, which is part of why they benched him late in the season. They wanted to toughen him up a little, see how he would react, see how he would do in the other position. And I mean, he didn't, a few days later, I remember I asked Luke, like, do you want him to respond better than this? And he said, yeah, I do. So there's all that. There's also, being a point guard, there's something that Lonzo has that D'Angelo just didn't have. Like, he didn't have the feel for the game that Lonzo has.
And they didn't think that they could play them. They didn't think they could play together.
See, I guess not, because I never heard that I never was under the impression that that's what they were going to do. I just had always heard that the plan was draft a point guard and trade the one we have right now. So
that's that's really interesting to hear. I mean, anyone who listens to Pete and I talk know that I mean, we're fans of Russell, and I'm going to root for him even when he's in Brooklyn. And in general, I'm like that especially with young players. These guys come into the league, they have a lot thrown at them. I want to see them succeed and be successful. This is, for a lot of these guys, their lifelong dream to make it to the NBA and be successful. And so I want to see that with all these young guys, regardless of whether or not they're Lakers. But it's very interesting to sort of hear you frame this in the way that this has sort of been in the works, and that it seems to me that maybe another way of framing this is that they were looking for reasons not to trade him, and ultimately they maybe never found them. Is that fair?
It could be. The other thing that I talked to one scout a few months ago at a game somewhere on the road, and he said to me, you can tell when you watch him that he's not very connected with his teammates. And I never thought of it that way, but that's sort of why I wonder if like a change of scenery might be good. It might help him sort of realize, the kind of player that he can be. Because everyone said that the thing with Nick from 2 years ago wasn't a big deal, that they all got over it, but it just that this one scout's opinion was that they didn't get over it, and that there's just this disconnect.
And I think you see when Lonzo is so far on the other end of the spectrum in that respect, that he really is a galvanizing force for everybody, that it makes that divide even greater. I personally would have loved to. I think Lonzo would have infected Russell at next to each other a lot more than vice versa. But it doesn't matter what I think. Obviously the Lakers saw Russell as a point guard and that they had this really phenomenal guy coming in. And if they got to move the Mozgov deal on it and have a chance at two max guys next summer as a result, that's absolutely cherry on top of the sundae right there. So, Tania, I want to move on to your experience really as a reporter. You've had an interesting journey, starting as an LA kid growing up, going to Arcadia High School, then made your way out to Orlando for the Magic, as I said, Houston Texans, and then the Lakers. I'm curious about your experience, the difference between the sports and covering the NBA versus the NFL, and then going from a fairly small market team, albeit in a very good part of their franchise's history in Orlando, to the biggest NBA basketball franchise in the world. What's your journey in that respect been like?
Yeah, it's been interesting. When I was covering the Magic, I was sort of like I was like the second or third beat writer We had decided as a paper that the Magic were so good, and Dwight Howard was a star. Dwight Howard was a superstar at that point, and
Yes.
they felt like they needed three people on the Magic every day. So I sort of got to like cut my teeth without a ton of pressure. And got to know what it's like to be on a beat. You forgot to stop. From there, I went to Jacksonville to cover the Jaguars and oversaw some crazy times for that franchise. The team got sold. The team got sold on the same day they fired their head coach and gave their and I knew something was happening because somebody texted me like I'm leaving the building. It's like 2 a.m. and there was this one guy's car still there, and they were like, I think something's happening. I didn't nail it down in time, but something did happen. That was my start in football, and then I went to Houston. And it's interesting. I covered the Texans for ESPN, and I think more people read my work now than did there, just because it's the Lakers, and it's it's like we don't have the reach of ESPN, but more people care so much about this franchise. And obviously, growing up here, my friends everyone's way more excited about this than they were about any of my other jobs. You're sort of a little more. It's really interesting to cover a team that was part of your community. And the other thing that I really like, I've really liked covering the NBA, and part of that is there's a lot more access. So you don't have to like grab onto every opportunity you have for FaceTime with people that like you did in the NFL, because there were 53 guys on the team, and they tried to keep them away from you. They tried to keep the coaches away from you. It was all very closed off and paranoid, and basketball is a lot less like that. So that's been fun.
Yeah, I actually wanted to get into that a little bit more, just sort of the differences between covering, what really is, at least in America, the most popular sport, and with covering the NFL, and kind of what that was like in dealing with like a 53-man roster, and then more guys on like the practice squad, and a bevy of coaches, positional coaches, coordinators, and just the magnitude of that versus covering what I would maybe assume is a bit more of an intimate environment with covering, a basketball team with only a 15-man roster and maybe 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 coaches, and the differences that you experienced with that, and even like locker room culture and things like that.
Yeah, there's a give and take, because there are more guys on the team in football but there are fewer games. So you have a little more, you have to write about the same game for a whole week. And so you got to get a little creative, but there's still a time there's time to get to, all these different guys, some who have interesting personal stories. There's time to get to all that during the course of that week. Whereas in basketball, there's so many games that it's much harder to fall into that kind of lull where you have to figure something out. And you have to get creative and like figure something to write about. For a team that's not winning a lot of games toward the end of the year, people always say, you've probably heard this before, that you either want your team to be really, really good or just a spectacular mess. Because
Yes.
both are interesting to cover, right? So like you have things to talk about. And with the Lakers last year, they weren't good, but there was a lot going on. So I never had to. I had a Julius Randle feature that I'm gonna write at some point this summer, but I sat down with him for 45 minutes in Miami, and I just never got to it because that was right when everything sort of started to blow up. It's definitely very different, but I've had a lot of fun with it, with the transition.
You wrote one of my favorite articles of the whole year. Was if our listeners, if you haven't read this, it's called "Rigors of the Road Can Be Disorienting for Lakers Players," and it was about how like NBA players and coaches and just people around the league just don't know what day of the week it is half the time, right? Like and you kind of went through that, right? You're traveling throughout the NBA season, which I'm sure is a totally different animal than covering the NFL. Can you, that was, again, if you're listening to this and you haven't read that, it's on the LAtimes.com still. It's a great story. Tania, can you talk a little more about your prep for that piece and just kind of what NBA life is like in that respect?
I sort of gathered like every road trip we went on, I would just if I didn't have anything else to do, I'd just sort of like ask someone. But yeah, like I started realizing like I never have any idea what day of the week it is. And I think when I decided to make it a story was when I think it was like right around the new year, and we somebody asked Luke in a press conference like what's like what were some of your highlights from last year? And Luke was like, well, I don't really see the year as ending now. Like the year ends when the season ends. And so like me and another guy went over to talk to like, you know, tease him about that a little bit in the locker room afterward. And he was like, guys, like we don't do holidays and like days of the week. Like what's Tuesday? What's Sunday? Like game day and not game day. And I was like, okay, and so everybody had such funny responses to it. And my favorite was David Fisdale, who was like, yeah. And then I got to include his dogs' names, which are a teaser for the story. Go read the story just for the names of David Fisdale's dogs.
Yeah, no, it was a remarkable tale of being caught up in just this sport that in baseball you're there for 3-4 days. In the NFL you get to go home, right, and then you fly back out later in the week. But the NBA, I don't think that's people realize just kind of the grind. Is that hard from your perspective as a journalist as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I have a little dog, so like it's like the NFL just has a rhythm. Like most of the time, I mean, they play every day now, but like most of the time, the start of the week is Wednesday. Thursday, they do like a pads practice. Friday's a light day. Saturday's a travel day. Sunday's the game. And then Tuesday's the off day. Monday, they debrief from the game, and then so on and so forth. So it's like there's a schedule, and you're not on the road very much. And you usually, in that story, like, a lot of those guys were talking about how they, the ways in which they sort of try to remember what room they're in. And that's happened to me too. Like, you're in 3 cities on 3 different nights. Sometimes I think I'm on the 7th floor and I'm actually on the 18th floor, and, because I was on the 7th floor yesterday. So, so there's just no rhyme or reason. And I would say, I mean, baseball writers will like come at me with torches for saying this, but I would say it's harder than what they do because they go to a city and they stay there for a few days. We go to a city and then we're out the next day.
Yeah, I was going to ask just in terms of the rigors of travel, but also just sort of the rigors of like work-life balance. Yeah. And like having things where you have to like work on Christmas every year, especially now that you're covering the Lakers, and just I know a lot of people who are sports writers, and just like we talked about earlier, like for the players, like this is a dream. And for a lot of people who are reporters, like this is something that they went to college for, and like they've wanted to do this their whole lives. And I'm not going to ask you to sort of like trash on any of this, but I did want to ask, like, just to give listeners a real genuine feel for like what, like, is it hard at times? You talk about you have a small dog, and just the time that you're at the arena. You just mentioned earlier about the Jacksonville Jaguar story that you were walking out at 2 a.m, and I'm sure it's like that now too with NBA games.
Yeah, well, that story I was not somebody that I knew who worked
okay.
with the team was walking out at 2 a.m and texted me and was like, "Why are they still here?" But yeah, it is. I mean, I'll give you an example. I moved into my apartment in October, which was not smart on my part. I should have done it earlier. I moved in October, and I still have boxes that I haven't unpacked. So, yeah, I mean, it's not it's work-life balance is difficult covering the NBA, but I mean, what we do is really fun. So I'm not complaining about that. But my dog does get upset a little bit. And doesn't like. I'm really excited. I'm in town for a whole month, so that's very exciting for me.
Yeah, this is that time of year, right, where
Yeah,
NBA, it's the one time everybody gets to go on vacation, right?
all shut down.
Well,
Yeah.
I was actually gonna jump in that it seems like the off season is getting shorter and shorter now, right? Like we're about to enter August, and the NBA off season has been a madhouse, and there's still a bunch of like restricted free agents who are unsigned, and the Lakers are seemingly still sort of looking at lower tiered free agents at like maybe point guard or on the wing, and do you ever feel like, man, like, am I going to get some time off anytime soon? Because the NBA offseason now seems to be shrinking.
Yeah, I think what you just have to do is like choose a time and just accept that if something happens, you're going to be off. Because you can't really, yeah, you're right. Like the off season, well, for the Lakers, we had to be there for, I mean, we don't always cover all of summer league, but because of the way it was going and how excited everybody was getting about Lonzo, like my boss called me and I think they were playing the Cavs that night and he was like, if they win, you need to go back to Vegas. Um, there's like, and not everybody has that. Not like, there's different things that are important to different teams and different times that things lighten up a little. Like I didn't do a lot of work in May. Um, so
Neither did the Lakers.
yeah, so but yeah, it is. I mean, Kyrie demanding a trade, that should have been an off time for the Cavs beat writers. They should not have been having to work like that last week. But
How are you all? During the season, you've got regular practices and games, and you've got access to everybody. Is this a difficult time of season, a difficult time of the year to gather information because you're not face to face with a lot of these people?
well, I think no, because I think at this point you've built enough relationships where like if you need to get in touch with someone, you can. So like I can get a hold of most people that I need to. And um, the Lakers have a really good PR staff. They always have. That was one of the things I was told um, when I came to take this job. Like they want to work with you and they want to help and they want you to be able to tell stories about the Lakers. Um, so if I needed, like if I need something, I can usually get it.
Yeah, and that was actually one last thing that I wanted to ask you is sort of what was your trend? So like we talked earlier about you sort of coming back home to the LA area, but how difficult of a transition was it for you, especially coming off of like an NFL beat to sort of reacquaint yourself with the NBA and then also coming into a new city and picking up a new beat for yourself with a new organization, especially one that has the name recognition and stature, at least in terms of brand, that the Lakers have. Was that a difficult transition? I know that you're a pro at this, but I like that stuff is interesting to me.
Yeah, no, it's you have to sort of give yourself time for the transition. I remember I had a conversation with I think Ramona Shelburne when I first started, and I was like, I want to, and I sort of like I was like revealing like my competitiveness. I was like, I want to get everything, and she was like, that's good that you want to, but you're just not right away. Like you're coming into a beat. It is a good time to come into the Lakers beat because they're at the start of something. They're not, there's more opportunity to build relationships, I think, because there's a lot of newness around the team. But there's also not, because as we talked about earlier, the Lakers tend to stay in the family when they hire people, right? So there's still, people in this town who have decades long relationships with Magic Johnson, with Luke, with Rob Pelinka. If you've been covering the NBA for a long time, you have a relationship with Rob Pelinka. So all that stuff that's where I'm sort of still catching up, and that stuff is all still very new to me. But it's that's what happens when you get on a new beat, and I'm really thankful that the LA Times felt like I could handle that. Even though I hadn't been covering the NBA, they felt like I would be able to get myself into that world and in pretty quick order, have all the contacts that I need to have.
Yeah, no, if this was your rookie year with the Lakers, you had a damn good one. And I hope the LA Times sees what they have in you and keeps you around for a long time, because you've been really an amazing read and an amazing interview today. Thank you so much, Tania.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So, all right, folks, that's all the time we got for today. Covered a lot of ground between LeBron, the Buss family, the Russell trade, and future plans, and then the experience of Tania as a reporter. So, again, I'd like to thank Tania Ganguli of the LA Times for joining us. As always, I'm Pete from Laker Film Room, joined by Darius Soriano from Form Blue and Gold. If you want to support what we do, our respective Patreon pages are pinned on our Twitter pages. Kick us down with a buck or two per month, and so we can keep this going. All right, guys, we'll catch you next time.